Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind podcast with Hilary and Bob. This week we're talking how to finance your property development in 2023. A very hot topic, we are aware. The banks are doing what they're doing. There's a lot going on out there in the finance world. We're going to unpack it for you, give you some ideas, maybe tighten up your knowledge a wee bit, and you're going to find this very interesting today. So let's jump on in to episode 89. Welcome to episode 89. As I said, how to finance your property development in 2023. But before I get started, apologies for not putting out last week's episode. Last week we covered off, what was that? The 3 must-haves of your property development coach. And quality control listened to it and said, I don't think we can put this out. Hey, Bob?
Yeah, we're so passionate about what we do.
Yes.
In our training that we probably got a little bit emotional, maybe a little bit hard.
We probably were. I think what you've got to realise is some people are coaches and mentors that shouldn't be. And we had some information come in and it was just frightening, and we thought, we've got to tell people, but it sounded terrible.
Yeah, no.
We sounded like we were whinging. Not whinging.
Yeah.
What's the word?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, whatever it was.
Whatever it was.
So we thought, no, we'll do it again with not quite the same, let's say, passion. Maybe not the same passion that we had the other time.
Yeah, we can't help it.
No, we can't help it. Anyway, so 89 got dumped at the last minute. There was no podcast last week, but we're out again this week. And this week, what about it? How to finance your property development in 2023. And remember, this is coming out in March. No, February. Last day of February, if it's the Thursday, or 1st of March.
No, it'll be the beginning.
No, it'll be, the first week in March.
That 28-day month in February throws me out sometimes.
Yeah, me too.
You know, because I'm often thinking, a month's like 4 weeks plus 2 or 3 days, but February, of course, not.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so it'll be March.
It'll be March.
Happy March, everybody.
Yes, happy March. Okay, so Bob, where do you want to kick off with this? We didn't even write notes down because it's such a massive and easy topic for us to make sure we tick off. Usually we think, well, we really need to cover this, and this, but finance is what we
it's something
do
we
a lot
do in
of.
our sleep. And we're involved in discussions around finance every day of the week.
Yeah. Most of the days.
It's either projects we're doing or projects that we're helping our mentoring students with.
Yep.
And finance is pretty critical. And the topic is, how to finance your property development in 2023. Why 2023? Well, because it's not always the same. Basically, it remains the same as it did.
The fundamentals are
ago.
The same.
Yep,
yes.
Yep. But things vary. I mean, it's not just interest rates that vary. There's other variables in that finance market space that vary, and hence we've chosen 2023.
Yeah, so it's quite relevant for those listening right now. And it could be relevant for a while, we just don't know.
Yeah. So most people are familiar with how to finance a single acquisition, let's say your own house that you're going to live in, or an investment property. That's pretty standard retail finance. We know how that works. We know the sort of loan-to-value ratios that banks lend on. And most of them are banks or, building societies that finance that sort of thing. And we know about... how it works. We'll assume that anybody listening to this podcast understands basic retail finance for a single acquisition, but property development, a bit more complex.
Can be.
And not all financial institutions are the same, and they don't treat it the same, and hence a lot of variables when it comes to doing a property development. So we could wind it out, I guess, and say, okay, well, what's the process at the moment for doing small projects?
So let's assume somebody is it's a splitter,
okay.
a duplex.
Something small. So entry level property development,
which is what we mostly deal with a lot.
Yeah, we do. So the simplest project, or if you like, the bottom line project that you'll ever do would be a 1-lot into 2-lot subdivision. It could be a subdivision, it could be a splitter. I mean, either way, they're different, but you end up with 2 lots, 2 titles at the end of the day. So it starts there. And if you're talking about construction, Well, the bottom end of that would be doing a 2-lot subdivision and perhaps building a house on the lots, or doing a duplex. So that's where it starts, and of course we go up from there. But something a lot of people don't realise is that the banks, let's just start with the banks. In fact, let's take one step back. Let's just say who out there, or what institutions out there do lend on property development, as opposed to just a single acquisition for a house or an investment. We have the banks, and of course we know the big 4 banks, we know who they are, but there's the other second tier banks, you know, Bank of Bendigo, Suncorp, those sorts of banks. And
it's funny, I always think of Suncorp as one of the big 4 because it's such a big name, but you're right, it's not.
Yeah, it's outside, definitely. It
Yes.
drops off a fair bit once you get away from the big 4. But there's still banks, they operate under a banking charter.
So the second tier banks operate under the same
Well, more
charter as
banks.
the big 4.
Yeah, they do. They're just a lot smaller.
Yep.
And their master is APRA, Australian Prudential Regulation. What is it? I forgot the A. Doesn't matter.
Association. I don't know.
They're
Accountability.
they're under APRA, right? And that's fine. They're banks. And then when in property development, when you move outside of the banks, you're moving into an area that we often call non-banks. So they're not banks. They don't operate under the banking charter. Their master isn't APRA. They operate under what is really the Corporations Act, I suppose you could say, and their master is ASIC. So different again. And then there's a third type of lender, which is what we call private equity. So I'm trying to keep it fairly simple. Private equity, there is a difference between a non-bank and private equity, and private equity would typically be wealthy individuals, wealthy families, if you like, who directly finance projects.
We come across quite a few of them too, don't we?
Yeah, well, they don't operate under the banking charter, of course.
No.
They're not.
Who are they regulated
They're not
by?
under APRA. They're not a non-bank as such, because they don't operate under ASIC. They don't operate under anyone.
Who's their boss?
Well, there is no boss.
Really?
and that's the
You
world.
want to be that guy?
That's the world of private equity. Okay, so keeping it simple, there's 3 avenues of finance, and so when we go looking for finance for a development, we need to keep in mind my little motto is get the cheapest finance you can get your hands on.
And I can. You say that on a very regular basis. I would hear you say that.
It's a general
weekly.
comment because it might be that you can't get bank finance. Okay, if you can't get bank finance, we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. Well, you go to the next level, which might be non-bank or even private equity, depending on the size of your project. So let's just bear that in mind. There's 3 avenues of finance. And then back to the beginning where we left it, when we're talking about doing a small project, albeit, little subdivision, duplex, whatever it is, there's often 2 stages, particularly if we're going to build. Let's keep it simple and say we're going to do a duplex. It's about the smallest sort of building that you're going to build. And at the end of the day, a duplex is just like a big house with a wall up the middle. That's really what it is. But you'll end up with 2 lots. And so that's what we're talking about. Now, when you go to the banks, the normal banks, the big 4 plus the second tier banks, and I'll be general here, banks make their money by lending at a low interest rate for a long period. Now, we know that. You go and get a home loan, you could get a 20, 25-year, even a 30-year loan.
Yeah, they love to string it out because they get more money.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. Yep. And quite often, as a borrower, that might suit us.
Yes. Less
with
repayments,
the repayments.
smaller repayments.
Yeah.
Yes.
So low interest rate, long period of time. Where they don't make money is lending at a low interest rate for a short period of time.
I.e. developments.
Because, e.g. developments. Because it still costs them the same amount of money to establish a loan. In terms of, their own cost, if you like, internal cost to set up a loan and to operate it. Whether it's a 30-year loan or a 1-year loan, it's about the same. Now, you can absorb that over a 30-year loan, but can you absorb that over a 1-year loan at really low interest rates? And the answer is, well, they don't make much money out of it. By the time they lend for a short period of time at a low interest rate and absorb all their upfront costs, there's not much in it, which is why banks really don't like lending on developments. I'm talking about retail, the retail arm of a bank, the one we're most used to seeing, the one with the branches, the one where we go to for an investment property or a home loan. What they often do if they think that you're going to do a development is they say, no, we won't finance that. You need to talk to our commercial division. And so within each of the banks, there is a commercial division, and they're a little bit different in that they lend at a higher interest rate for a short period. So they're okay with the short period.
What's the average?
Not the low interest rate.
Difference between residential and commercial bank?
In terms of costing and everything?
No, maybe just on interest rate. Is it usually a 4% difference? 3%?
Oh, look, the differential it's not necessarily a big one. With a bank, it could be like 2.5%, probably 2.5%.
Oh, yeah, that's not so bad, is it?
But they will charge higher application fees.
What sort of application fees are we looking at?
Well, 0.5% of the loan. I have seen some banks try and squeeze out up to 1%, whereas on a retail loan, it can be anything from nothing to sort of 600. So application fees higher on the commercial, interest rates higher, and so they have to really, in fairness to the banks, they have to make more money because it's only out for a short period. Yeah. That loan might only be out for 1 to 2 years. So that's what happens there. But what often happens is that when we're doing a development, we end up going through, say, 2 loans. Not at the same time, 1 loan at a time. And so let's just explain that. Quite often, when we buy a development site, in most cases, we're developing infill. And what we mean by that is there's already an established area and it's probably zoned right for doing a duplex or townhouses. There's already probably an old house on the site. That's typical of what we do.
Pretty standard.
Most of our students are doing that. They're not out on the edges of the suburbs where there's larger acreage lots and doing bigger subdivisions. That's different. So most of it's infill, and most of the infill is already an existing house. So we're either going to keep the existing house and let's say get into the backyard and put up another house or a duplex or whatever in the backyard, or we're going to demolish the house and build new. So we're going to generally, in most cases, that's what we're going to do, buy the old house. Now, when we buy a house, more often than not, it's a raw block. Raw meaning it doesn't have a development approval. We're just buying the old house, and our intention is buy the old house, get our approvals, our development approval, our building approval, and then construct whatever we're going to construct, and then sell it and make a profit.
And just a wee tip there, Bob did say more often than not. It's sometimes, we are buying stuff that does have approvals, has a DA, but more often than not, you'll be buying a raw site.
Yeah, so a few variables. Assuming we're buying the old house, it might stay, we might demolish it. That's a possibility. It might have a development permit or it might not. And there's then some other variables. I can tell you if it already has a development permit, you've got no chance of buying it with a retail loan from a retail bank.
Because they know it's a development.
They will send you straight to their commercial division. That's okay. But sometimes when you're buying a raw site with no development permit, as far as the financier is concerned, they just look at it as an investment property. Probably not a bad idea to do this through a broker who has experience with development. Not your normal average retail finance broker that just gets you a loan for your house or an investment property and hasn't done any development stuff is not who you should go to, because often they'll say the wrong thing and stuff up your application.
And they might be lovely and they might be a friend of yours, but it could cost you a lot of money. So
I've seen plenty of deals go down the gurgler with the wrong broker.
Yeah, it was about 2 years ago. It was so easy.
Yeah, and so
in particular,
in a way, what you've sort of got to do is not fly the flag that you're buying this property to develop. Because as soon as you say that, you're out the door. Quite often I've seen people just purchase it as an investment property because that's the way the bank's going to look at it. And a little bit later, when they got their approval, then
they're like,
it'll be a different story.
Let's do a development.
Yeah. So typically some form of retail loan to buy the site. And then after we've got our approvals and we need to do the construction, then we might switch across to a commercial loan.
And is it more likely, Bob, that commercial loan will be with the same bank, or because you've already
Doesn't have to be. Could be.
Is it what is it 50% chance? Like, what's the likelihood of that happening?
The likelihood part comes back to, do you qualify for a commercial loan from a bank once you get to that construction phase? Do you? And if you do, then you may well stay with that bank. The bank might not be totally happy with you, however, because when you bought it, you didn't tell them you're going to do a development.
You were digging in for that 30 years of interest they were looking for.
You just told them you're going to buy it as an investment property. But
Bob, you just use the words you might qualify, and so you're talking about you earn enough, the serviceability, the value in the property. Is that
not as a commercial loan? So
no.
I'm trying to, if we keep it on track.
Yeah.
So quite often there's one loan. The first loan that you take out is to buy the property. Then you get your approvals, and that's when you might then switch to a commercial loan to do the construction, and you might have to tip in some extra money at that point. So quite often that second loan is a commercial loan, but be clear, you will only ever have one loan on a property at a time.
Because that commercial loan wipes out the residential.
Yeah. So if you have, let's say, a retail loan, you buy it, you get your approvals, now you're coming up to construction, you can't get a construction loan on retail, let's say, and then you have to go to commercial. That commercial loan, as Hilary just said, the first thing that will happen is they will pay out whatever's owing on that retail loan, because they want a registered first mortgage over the site, and you can't have two banks, two different financiers with a registered mortgage. Even if you use the same bank, the mortgage can stay on because it's still the same bank, but it'll be out of retail and into commercial, but it's probably not the way you normally do it, because the retail bank would be a bit annoyed because, it wasn't the story when you came in. So that first loan to acquire it, you get the best sort of retail loan you can. It might be from a bank, and maybe, you have to tell a bit of a story or whatever your broker tells you have to say. That's okay. But even these days, if you don't have serviceability, and remember, if it's a retail loan, you have to have a deposit and you have to have serviceability. But there's still no doc loans around. Now, they're not cheap. The application fees are higher, could be, 1.5-2% of the loan. Interest rates are higher, could be anything from, probably 9.5 at the moment. Remembering these things change all the time, so these sort of interest rates I'm talking about are only current
March 23.
23.
Yeah. You'd listen to this in 3 years.
So there is finance out there, even no doc is still around, and then that might get you through until you got your approvals, and then you can go to a commercial loan.
So, and with commercial loans, it doesn't matter so much about, it doesn't even matter about serviceability, because that interest is inside the loan.
Yeah, it's capitalised into the loan. So with a commercial loan, the big difference between a retail loan is serviceability is not really the issue, and you don't have to find the interest every month. They actually lend you the interest, which is pretty cool. So part of the loan, part of the borrowings from the bank is an interest component built into it. And so each month when the interest is due, the bank simply takes their monthly interest out of that allocation.
Out of the money they loaned you.
Out of the money they loaned you.
How good is commercial finance?
Yeah, it is.
Who started that system, Bob? What a great
Well,
way to do
if they
business.
didn't do it that way, unless you're extremely wealthy, you couldn't service. You get up to do a 6-7 townhouse development. You can imagine if you could only do that with serviceability, there'd be not many people could afford it, and therefore there'd be a lot less developers and a lot less stock built, and there wouldn't be enough, definitely not enough coming onto the market, and it'd create severe drama. So one of the good things is that even a small developer, once to get commercial finance, once it's built in there, of course there's capitalised interest, it's good, because even if you couldn't
It's a game
afford it,
everybody can play.
Yeah. So that commercial finance that, if you like, now takes over from the retail loan around the construction phase, when you're ready to start building, when you've got your approvals and sorted your builder out, it could be bank finance if you're solid enough. Remember, banks being banks are conservative, and so they want to know.
Got to tick a few more boxes.
Got to tick a lot of boxes, and banks generally have tightened up on development finance during the last few years. So it's harder now to get development finance, if you like, or commercial finance from a bank than it was in years gone past. And so, but the good news is there's always the alternatives.
And you've mentioned no doc a few times, Bob. Are we going to unpack that shortly, or you just want to leave that?
No doc is really the first loan, the acquisition loan.
And just that not everyone understands what no doc is.
Well, no doc means that you don't have to supply any paperwork to prove your serviceability. So with a no doc loan, you don't need pay slips, you don't have to show your tax returns, you don't have to show anything that proves you can afford the loan, really. Now, responsible lending says that there needs to be an exit strategy. From the funder's point of view on a no doc loan, they want to know, well, look, if we give you a no doc loan and we're responsible lenders, how are you going to pay us back? Because we're not checking on your serviceability. The answer to that is that when you get your approvals, you're going to switch across to a commercial loan and pay them out. And so that, in reality, is what you're going to do. So that's how you then pay out the no-doc loan. From the lender's point of view, they can say, okay, that's a fair and reasonable exit strategy, in, 8, 10, 12 months' time, whenever it comes. And therefore they are lending responsibly, which they have to do, by having that exit strategy in line. And the exit strategy is when you get your approvals, you're going to go somewhere else, get a commercial loan and pay them out. So that commercial loan will say that you're now going to take on, after you've got all your approvals, pays out anything previous, and you go ahead. Now that could be a bank commercial, which is obviously the cheapest type of commercial loan, lower interest rate, lower application fees, but a lot of people really don't qualify these days because they're so tight and so stiff from the banks.
Because too many loops. They've got to. It's very with banks. They've got to tick their boxes. It's black or white. There's not a lot of grey. There's a few people that could get away with grey, but mostly not.
No.
So you've got to find us.
If you've got a good history with a bank on the commercial lending front, that would tick a lot of boxes.
But not necessarily all, hey?
Not necessarily. If you're really strong financially, or stronger than you need to be, that can tick them. But look, a lot of people might not qualify currently for commercial bank finance, so then you're in the world of the non-banks. Back in, many years ago, look, let's go right back, pre-GFC, in the commercial lending area, commercial finance for developments, banks used to do about 80% of all lending.
Really? So what is it now?
It's about the other way around. It's about 20% bank and 80% non-bank or private equity. Yeah, so we put the year 2023 on the name of this podcast for a very good reason. That it doesn't always stay the same.
In case that lady's listening.
Yeah. So things change all the time. We know that, you know, the way who's lending this week is not lending next week. Interest rates change, construction costs change, everything changes. The whole market, is always liquid and on the move, which makes life exciting. So back to that commercial finance for the construction phase, quite possibly we got to tip a little bit of extra money in at this point. We would have put a deposit down, if you like, when we bought the site in the first place. That's equity. We would have spent more money on getting our approvals, and that's more equity. But more than likely, we're still a bit short now because we need some extra money now to build everything and to pay out the first loan. And so we might have to tip some extra money in.
Can I ask that question, Bob? I don't know if I'm allowed to go down this road yet.
Here we go.
You've pulled me back already a couple of times. I'm racing through. So this is to get the non-bank commercial finance requiring extra equity. How do they go about getting it? How does this new developer go about getting that finance before they can get their construction finance?
Yeah, and look, the borrower may well have it. So before you start doing any project, you'll do a feasibility, and then understanding the LVRs that financiers lend on and understanding all your figures, you can tell right at the very beginning when you do your feasibility how much equity you're going to have to put into that project to complete it. The total equity requirement for a project. It's not hard to work out if you've got an accurate feasibility. Now, when you purchase the site, you don't have to put all of that equity in. You put enough in, to comfortably purchase it. But it's when you get to the point where you're ready to start building and you've got all your approvals that you have to top it up with some more. And you would have already known from day one what that extra money is. And so if you've got it, you've got it. But if you don't, then as you well know, you have to get it from somewhere else, and that would be an investor. And that's back to your world. because you run all the investment side of our property development business and also our education business for that matter. So you're dealing with investors every day. And that would be what we would call a loan partner, not an equity partner, not a joint venture partner at that point. Because you're well advanced in the project, you're ready to start construction.
So ideally, you don't need them as a joint venture partner because you've done the work.
Because a joint venture partner
shares in the profit.
Yeah, would generally be rewarded by profit share. Well, you've done all the hard yards. You don't want to be sharing the profit. You just need what we call a loan partner, which is somebody who will lend you that extra bit of money that you need for maybe 12 months, or remember, you've got to now build it and sell it. Could be, however long it takes to build it and a couple of months to sell it. And just pay them an interest rate. So it might be that they're getting an interest rate which, currently could be, 15, 17% interest for that 12-month period. And they may be able to secure their position with a second mortgage or whatever it is. So that's how you would get the extra money then if you didn't have it. And you would have known from day one that you're not going to have it. So you've had plenty of time to start talking to investors about kicking in. You
actually just brought up another point there, Bob, where you said the security would be they might be able to secure a second mortgage, because remembering that the bank already has the first mortgage over that. So this person coming in...
Or the financier.
Yeah, the finance, whoever that is,
yeah.
has that first mortgage. So the person coming in has to be okay with a second mortgage. And that's fine. We do it every day. We do it every day.
Yeah, and that's keeping it simple. I mean, I could do a
whole day on this one.
I could do a whole day on mortgages if you want to. No. Okay, good. So that's obviously the answer to the question, which you already knew the answer of, but thanks for reminding me for our listeners and our viewers. So we're into that second loan now. That's we can call it our development loan, our construction loan, our commercial loan. If it's a non-bank, so we've talked about the banks being a bit tough. If we can't do it there, we go to a non-bank. Once again, we're paying higher costs. So we're probably paying application fees in the range of 1.5% to 2%, plus GST, of course.
So let's take that back to our duplex scenario we were using. What would that likely be? On average, what would that fee generally be for that?
Well, 1.5% to 2% of the loan amount, if it's non-bank commercial. Interest rates, well, they're going to vary. I mean, right now, early March 23, the non-bank interest rates probably start around 9%. So that's the sort of application fees at the moment. That's the sort of interest rates, and they can go up from that. The other thing is their lending levels or their loan to value ratios. So in the non-bank arena, they typically lend as a percentage of the gross realisation. So gross realisation being the value of your finished product. So if it was 2 duplex units and they're worth $1.5 million each, then obviously the gross realisation value is $3 million.
$3 million.
They would, and you have to take the GST back off that because they lend you net of GST, and so they might lend 65%. Some might even lend 70% of that figure, and so that's how much they'll lend you. Then you have to work out, well, what's it costing, and what equity do I have, and then you can quickly work out what your extra bit is you have to tip in at that point. So, as I said, application fees 1.5% to 2% typically at the moment. That can vary. Interest rates 9% up, and that can vary. Loan to value ratios, let's say 65% up, sometimes up to 70% of the GOV net of GST. Sometimes that's offset by percentage of total development costs. It depends.
Could that be offset by pre-sales or anything like that?
Well, now banks love pre-sales as a risk mitigation. Non-banks generally don't require pre-sales, which it can be a good thing because you don't have to put the brakes on and then go looking for pre-sales. Certainly on smaller projects, most of them don't require pre-sales, and depending on the experience of the developer, the size of the project, they may not. Even with a 6-pack, it could be a 10-pack with a more experienced developer. They don't want pre-sales, so that can be a good thing. So that varies again. Another thing about the non-banks, they're not as the scrutiny isn't as hard on the borrower than a bank, and so you can be, let's say, not as squeaky clean as you have to be at a bank, and that can help as well.
We're talking about your credit rating here, not that you're a bikie. Gang member.
If you're an undischarged bankrupt, that probably wouldn't be good, but you could have a little bit of credit impairment. What non-banks tend to do is they're asset lenders. So they tend to lend against the deal. I mean, certainly they look at the person and they don't want to be somebody who's owing money all over town and so forth, but assuming they scrub up reasonably well, not necessarily to the extent of bank, they're really looking at the deal itself. And they're lending more on the deal than they are on the borrower, but not that they ignore the borrower. So it's easier in terms of that again. So in a lot of ways, it's easier. With a non-bank, they often lend more than a bank, although there's a cost penalty in terms of application fees and interest rates. You don't need pre-sales usually, which can mean you can just keep going straight ahead. You don't have to stop and get pre-sales. That can be a good thing. And they don't look at the borrower as hard. So there are advantages with non-banks, and it's more than just the application fees and the interest rates, if you look at the whole package as well. So, and there's lots of moving parts. I could do a whole day on non-banks.
Yeah. This is a great overall for people to understand how you do finance a property development in general all the time, but in 2023.
Then there's private equity.
Yes, and then it's private equity.
So private equity is not a bank under APRA, it's not a non-bank under ASIC. It's individuals, wealthy people, wealthy families who lend money to a developer. And look, if you scaled private equity down to its lowest form, it could be just a simple investor. It could be that situation you talked about before where you've acquired a property, you've got your approvals, you reached a point now where you want to go for a commercial loan that's going to pay out the first loan and so forth, but you have to put some extra money in. You don't have it. Okay, we need to pull an investor in. And it could be, well, that investor technically is private. Well, it's not even equity. It's we'll call it private equity, but it's private debt as opposed to equity without getting, too sharp on it. And in its smallest sense, and it might be, $200,000-$400,000 top up that you need. That is private equity, but in a bigger sense,
if we were using private equity for the construction, not just the
or
top
even
up.
the whole lot, it can be. These are wealthier people, wealthier families, and look, they might come in right at the beginning. So it could be that somebody will, in the private equity world, will finance a project from beginning to end. So they'll finance it when you acquire it, right through to all your approvals, and then continue to finance it all the way out the other end. They're often very similar sorts of rates to the non-bank, but they can be easier to do business with sometimes. They're very decisive.
They wouldn't have the upfront application fees and stuff,
well,
would they?
They can, but they're not, because they're not constrained by APRA or ASIC.
They can make their own rules.
They can make their own rules, and they do, but it can be more streamlined.
Yeah.
I've done a private equity loan in a day. I did 15 apartments once. I had all my paperwork together. I had everything together, all my feasibilities and my full everything about it, even had a valuation in place. I went to a private equity it was actually a broker I knew who dealt purely in private equity. I went to him in the morning with my full package, and he had an approval in the afternoon.
I think that's a really good tip there. He had it all organised, and that's important.
And what he did, he had a look at the deal, he had a look at the size of it and where it was, and then knowing he had a whole range of private, wealthy individuals and wealthy families on his books, and he knew some people like to lend in a certain area, maybe they live there. Some people like to lend in a certain size, and some might. And what this particular individual who financed the whole project, 15 townhouses I think it was, they liked the location. It was a really good location. They liked me. They looked at my CV and they liked me, and they liked the whole deal. And generally, these people are very decisive. They're quick to make decisions. They don't muck around. And by the afternoon, they said, "Yep, we'll fund him." That deal done. And that can be in the world of private equity.
And if you don't have that Bob Anderson boxes to tick?
It's still the same. I'm thinking of...
those Bob Anderson.
I'm thinking of somebody at the moment in our mentoring program who's only done one project previously. It's close to completion, and it's a type of joint venture. They've just been funded on not a big project, private equity, where they're taking the whole project. And because the private equity individual knows the market so well, they're not even worried about that valuation. They've just gone straight into it on fairly similar terms to what you get from a non-bank, but so much more streamlined.
And he's doing such a good job.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So that's a quick sort of synopsis, I guess, on funding. Could do a 3-day workshop, couldn't we? And you could do the whole thing on investor funding, because that's the world
I
you
keep
live
wanting
in.
to say, you've just got to go and do that. And then you have to do, I can't help myself, but I'm holding back because we'll carry on talking for the rest of the day, and people probably need to carry on. They're at work by now, or they've arrived where they need to go if they're listening or watching.
Yeah.
So do you think we've covered it off there enough?
Hopefully we've covered all the basics and how the different types of finance work.
Yeah.
And when you use one and not another, and where we're sitting in 2023, that's probably what we set out to do.
We actually put out an email on Friday asking if people wanted to basically be private equity partners.
In projects we might be doing ourselves, or even sometimes when we're holding the hands of a mentoring student going through a project, which is really like us in the background, steering the whole thing, of course.
So we do have a few opportunities available right now and that's the thing with sometimes with the private equity, the number, it's larger numbers you're looking for. So, around the 400s, 450s we're looking for at the moment.
Yeah, pretty much if there's an investor with 400,000 cash or more. Sometimes if you've got an unencumbered property, that can be used as well. Who wants to get involved on the in various ways of doing it.
Yeah, actually, these are probably a lot of these are joint ventures we're looking for as well.
Could be joint forms of joint venture.
Yeah, they are.
Where you can make good money as a joint venture with, us sort of, or the student with us behind them doing controlling everything. Having done 1.3 billion, got a good idea how it works.
Yes, Bob, you do know what you're doing.
So,
Especially when it comes to finance.
Anybody out there with a lazy 400 doing
sitting
nothing
around, or more.
I want to get involved in something.
I've got some great spots we could park in and get you making...
Let Hillary know.
Let you make a lot of money. So it's such a win-win situation. And for those listening, think of it like that as well. It is a win-win situation. We are so lucky that we help other people make money. How good is that? And then people with money make more money, and people without money make money. It's so good.
Yep.
So before we wind up, Bob, giving away Secrets of Property Millionaires Exposed this week, going to Lisa Kean.
Lisa, great.
Yes, she jumped in the Q&A the other day. Anyway, Lisa, this book is in the post to you. Thank you so much for reaching out to us. And I think that's a bit of a wind-up for 89. We'll redo the coaching one sometime soon. How about that?
Sounds good.
Thank you for your wealth of knowledge there, Bob. You're a blooming legend when it comes to all things property development, and even more so around finance and creative strategies and everything.
Yep, that's the stuff I love talking about.
All right,
it's
everybody.
The smart end of property development.
It is. You're a smart man. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next week. Bye.
Bye now.